Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network 𝐄𝐦𝐢𝐥 Weekend Review. I'm Asbet Bedrosyan, and along with 𝐂𝐦𝐢𝐥 𝐒𝐚𝐬𝐺, this week we're going to talk about the following major topics: Syunik Confidential, developments in Artsakh, snap elections flip-flop.
And to talk about these issues, we have with us Emil Sanamen, a senior research fellow at USA's Institute of Armenian Studies, specializing in politics in the Caucasus with a special focus on Azerbaijan, and Alen Zamanyan, who follows and has analyzed Armenian politics for over a decade. Hello and welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, greetings.
So former Prime Minister Hrant Bagration made some shocking revelations this week after visiting Syunik. He published a document that Armenia has allegedly signed with Azerbaijan and Russia on the use of segments of a highway in Syunik bordering Zangilan and Kubatlu. The document seems to answer many of the questions raised over the past few months around the mysterious withdrawal of Armenian and advancement of Azerbaijani border guards in the region, despite the November 10 agreement specifying that both sides remain standing in the positions they occupy. Deputy Prime Minister Tigran Avinyan indirectly confirmed this in a Parliament question and answer session, where he did admit that besides the November 10 and January 11 statements, there is a third agreement covering the border highway in Syunik. He also mentioned that he can't say anything more about it in an open session of Parliament because of the secret nature of the issue. Emil, we did talk about demarcation and delimitation in previous episodes of this podcast, but do you have any comments on this? Have you seen the document, and can you comment specifically actually on the way that this issue was revealed to the public?
Yeah, it was clear that there was some kind of an agreement that was not revealed. It's actually, I guess, kind of positive that it's actually on paper, though it's not clear if it was actually signed. The version that was published was missing signatures. But yeah, there was a situation on the ground in which the Armenian forces had withdrawn to the area which they controlled as of beginning of 1993. If we recall the course of the first Karabakh war, in the beginning, Azerbaijanis had positions very close to Kapan and kept shelling Kapan. So in December of 1992, Armenian forces actually took that area close to Kapan and also along the Kapan-Goris highway. And the individuals involved in that operations actually was at the time Defense Minister Vazgen Manukyan, and the commander of the forces in that area was Yuri Khachaturov. So they managed to take that area and kind of create this protective belt around Kapan. This is before Kubatlu and Zangilan were captured later that year, in 1993. So when the Armenian forces pulled back, there were sort of ready positions there that they, vacant, of course, positions, but the ones that they kind of occupied and intended to hold to continue to protect Kapan and the Kapan-Goris road. However, as we now know, there's an additional agreement between Armenian government, Nikol Pashinyan, and the Russians and the Azerbaijanis that even that area had to be vacated, and they vacated it and pulled to, I guess, the Google Maps line of the administrative border. So now we know that there is a document about that as well.
Yeah, what irks me though is the way that this was, announced, and only after Bagration obtained a hold of the document and leaked it, then they admitted it. Because the purported document, if it is accurate or if it is genuine, has a date of December 18th for the withdrawal of Armenian troops. So it was signed sometime before that. Yet in an interview to the Armenian public television on December 27th, so 10 days after the withdrawal, Pashinyan denied the existence of the document outright and mentioned that the repositioning of the troops was based on verbal agreements, which...
Yeah, look, Nikol Pashinyan was writing on his Facebook that he was fighting for Shushi 3 hours before he signed the surrender document. So the level of credibility is very low, and I'm not surprised that he would lie about this or misconstrue. It's just been his style, and nothing surprising there. He did mention that, if you recall, in Parliament, I think it was mid-December, that there were issues to be resolved on the Syunik border, and there was a visit by the Russian FSB chief, Bortnikov, to Armenia and Azerbaijan on December 18, 2020, and I guess that visit intended to make sure that the Armenian forces had evacuated those areas around Kapan and between Kapan and Goris.
Alan, what are your thoughts? Why is the Armenian government so apparently obsessed with secrecy of issues when this document appears to be in the hands of Russian and Azerbaijani troops and being shown to whoever requests to see it? We've seen other reports that villagers were shown this document as proof that they need to pull back.
I think in general this government is they're masters at controlling information flow and monitoring public opinion and making sure that their actions are when they're not popular, that they are not revealed to the public. They keep it secret. I mean, this has been going on since they took over. They promised the utmost transparency, especially in the Artsakh issue. Then they went on to negotiate in secrecy for 2.5 years. Along the way, repeatedly stating explicitly that there were no negotiations. During the war, as Emil mentioned, just nonstop, misinformation, even to the last day, right before they signed the document. So it's not surprising to me. They know that every piece of information like this that gets leaked hurts their credibility, hurts their rating. Even if there's a segment of the population that supports them, their rating is continuously dropping with each bit of information that is leaked.
So the other aspect to this, to the secrecy issue, was just a few days ago, the Armenian National Security Service has announced that any news coverage from Syunik about the region, or I think basically any news coverage, must be done with prior permission from the National Security Service, meaning you have to apply and they have to okay it. Emil, do you know anything additional about this, and what could be the legal basis for such a request? I mean, is it the state of the martial law? Is it a state of emergency? And does this mean that we could be hearing about more surprises from Syunik in the near future?
Well, more surprises. I mean, it's clear that the policy is to basically normalize what's happening, and as part of that is the cover-up is part of that. So any incidents, there were two specific incidents in the last couple of weeks. One incident when two Azerbaijani soldiers walked on the Armenian side and were detained by the Armenian side and then released. Another incident was when the Azerbaijani soldiers captured a flock of sheep from the Armenian side, and then the Armenian military intervened and apparently they returned the flock. And neither of those incidents, which would be considered incidents on the border, were reported either by Defense Ministry or by the National Security Service. So I imagine they're not reporting them because they have political instructions not to report any incidents, and they don't want anybody else to report the incidents, so they introduced this new restrictions, which I'm not sure they're going to be able to enforce. But the problem is the Armenian media that actually actively works in a field, particularly in places like Syunik or Artsakh, is very few. There's really only maybe half a dozen channels or news media that sends correspondents, like Civilnet, Statul Akopian, or I don't know, somebody who actually knows the geography, is comfortable working in the rural areas outside of Yerevan Kentron, and there are few of those people. I can't imagine they will stop working. We'll see. I mean, I think there has been some pushback on this instruction from the National Security Service. I can't imagine they will be able really to enforce it, just like they can't really enforce the border regime there. So the much more concerning to me was this announcement from the Artsakh government. Again, it was not unexpected. But essentially now the Russian peacekeeping command will have the veto power on who can visit Artsakh.
Yeah.
And that's been the case already for the past couple of weeks, maybe more than a month. If you remember the reports when Armenian recruits, Armenian soldiers that went on vacation in Yerevan or elsewhere in the Republic of Armenia could not return to Artsakh. There were reports about that, and Defense Ministry denied that, even though that was actually the case. And again, we have a regime now in Armenia which is is a regime collaborating with the Azerbaijani regime, Aliyev regime, basically carrying water for that regime. And of course, it's not normal, but there is an effort to normalize this reality and to basically, continue as if nothing happened or as nothing is happening. And that requires more restrictions on access, more restrictions on what can be said, restrictions on Parliament's ability to vote the Prime Minister out, which is why the martial law isn't still in place, etc.
Earlier this week, 𝐅 𝐞𝐦𝐢𝐥 met with the head of the Azerbaijani National Security Service. This one, thankfully, is official news, and the announcement says that they spoke about the return of prisoners, search of missing, and other humanitarian issues. To me, this sounds like the task of, the Red Cross or other bodies. So, Emil, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about this development, and do you think they talked about anything else that hasn't been officially announced?
I'm not privy to how this meeting took shape. It's clear that the meeting was primarily between the Armenian National Security Service director and the Azerbaijani one, which they've had a number of meetings already, everywhere from Yerevan to Syunik. Now in Artsakh they met, and 𝐅 𝐞𝐦𝐢𝐥, being kind of an activist local governor, decided to join in the meeting. I don't know if it was pre-agreed with the Azerbaijani side or not, but obviously the Russian peacekeeping commander was there as well. So there is an effort to kind of start some kind of direct communication between NK authorities and Azerbaijani authorities. And I think the Azerbaijani authorities will be much more relaxed about having contacts like that, because they are in a position of power right now. And, if there are some issues, and obviously the Artsakh authorities have been facilitating Azerbaijani reconstruction efforts in Shushi and 𝐾𝐥𝐲𝐚𝐧. As you know, the weather has been very snowy in Armenia, so Azerbaijani units in 𝐾𝐥𝐲𝐚𝐧 are actually cut off right now in terms of ground communication from the rest of Azerbaijan. So they rely on the road that goes through the Armenian-controlled part of Karabakh, between Terterva and Mardakert into 𝐾𝐥𝐲𝐚𝐧. So they've been facilitating that transportation of goods and taking sick Azeri soldiers out through Mardakert, etc. So the Artsakh authorities are also collaborating with Azerbaijani regime, and that's part of this collaboration.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, earlier this week, we heard reports that visitors to Artsakh, apparently with the exception of Armenian citizens, will now be required to obtain permission from Russian peacekeepers. There were some news reports also that Russians collaborate with Azerbaijan and basically act as their passport control agency. So, Emil, I don't know if you know anything else, but it wasn't specified essentially how the Russians would determine the eligibility. What do you think is happening behind the scenes there? And, do you think the Azerbaijani government also is in the loop?
Yeah, I'm sure they are in the loop, in the sense that they made a statement that we shouldn't have the Armenian ministers coming there or any other people like that without our permission, and they made a kind of a distinction between the local resident Armenian citizens resident in Karabakh, from Armenians from Republic of Armenia or anybody else trying to visit Artsakh. So we've rolled back to the situation of 1991, when there was this effort to, as the Soviet government called it at the time, enforce the passport regime. And the notion was that there were this Armenian radicals coming from Republic of Armenia to sort of organize the local self-defense and engage Soviet army there. And the passport regime had to be enforced to make sure that only the local residents stay there and they're peaceful. So something along the lines is taking shape right now. Of course, there is no Soviet government right now, and the Russian position is not as allied with Azerbaijani position, or Moscow's position not allied with Baku as it was in 1990, 1991, but we are somewhere between that regime that existed in 1990, 1991 and 1989 regime, which was a more sort of friendly regime to Armenians, where the Soviet government at the time delegated Arkady Volsky as its representative into into Nagorno-Karabakh to sort of restart the economy and try to facilitate other developments in Karabakh to basically buy off Karabakh Armenians and make them less supportive of reunification with Armenia. And now we have Rustam Muradov, who's the commander of the Russian peacekeeping detachment. They're basically playing similar role because they're not just doing peacekeeping; they're also doing obviously demining work. They're doing medical work. They're doing lessons in school and all that. So basically, it's become a kind of a Russian mandate territory, but with some collaboration with Azerbaijan as well.
Alan, what are your thoughts on this?
I think you mentioned that it's only open to citizens of the Republic of Armenia, but if I'm not mistaken, I saw in media reports that it's also open to Russian citizens. I mean, obviously, the Russian peacekeepers have to be able to get to Artsakh. Yeah, so there's a question about what happens if someone who's not a citizen of Armenia or Russia shows up in Berdzor, tries to get into Artsakh. I guess. It's an open question. There was a report that there was a delegation from France that tried to go and they were sent back and they had some issues there. So it's an open question, but definitely not a good development.
Well, the way the Artsakh Foreign Ministry put it is that now basically before visiting Artsakh you have to be in Yerevan. Or at least you have to be in touch with the Artsakh mission in Yerevan, present your passport somehow, obviously most likely you have to do it physically, to be able to get permission, and this process of getting permission could take 4 days or more. During those days, the Artsakh Foreign Ministry would be, I guess, liaising with the Russian Peacekeeping Command, and I would imagine the Russian Peacekeeping Command would be probably sharing that information with Azerbaijani officials as well, and they would make determination whether they want you to visit or not. And, yes, this does not cover the Armenian citizens at this point, but it covers all other citizens, including Russian citizens, because they made the point that even people from countries that don't require a visa to visit Artsakh, which includes all of the former CIS countries, or almost all of them, they would still require to apply for this permission and to wait for permission before they start moving on to Artsakh. And obviously, if you're in basically tourism business or something like that, this is going to make it very difficult for
Emil, what is the reason for this? Is there really a security issue, or is this basically sort of predetermining the status issue?
No, it's I would imagine there is an element of security there that obviously it's not as secure as it was last year.
So do you think it was basically do you think it was because they wanted to assure the security of the French delegation, or was it something else?
No. So there is a security issue that exists, but at the same time, the main issue is they want to make sure that they don't have basically people coming in that would irritate Azerbaijan. Basically, I think that's what the idea is. So if it's somebody that they don't want to see in Karabakh, they would basically argue about it at least and try to prevent their visits. And in this case, I think it was just an obviously foreign group of people, French-speaking people, and they were stopped, I think, at the border, and then they had to go back and get documentation, and then they were allowed to visit. But basically, for this regimes, they usually the enforcement mechanisms over it. So the first step is to make sure that nobody comes in willy-nilly, on just their own volition, and they basically alert the Russian peacekeepers before they come. And then they might, for the first month, they might not have any concerns about this applicants, but then they might start to categorize applicants into certain categories: the ones they want to see, the ones they don't want to see, etc. So, but I mean, what else do you expect when you give up your own security regime and give it to somebody else? That somebody else is going to control that security regime. So that probably not going to be limited to Artsakh alone. There's probably going to be a new regime in Armenia as well in terms of visas and all that. Now currently U.S. citizens, European Union Armenian citizens don't need visas to visit Armenia, but I'm not sure how long that's going to last.
Emil, you mentioned that the Artsakh mission in Yerevan apparently has a formal role now that Russians are recognizing. What's happening with the Artsakh missions in the United States and Russia? I heard some rumors that Azerbaijan is demanding that they be taken down.
Well, yeah, of course they've been demanding that for a long time, but no, I don't think they're going to be taken down. I mean, you don't really even need Artsakh to have an Artsakh mission somewhere, So most likely they will continue as long as there's funding, and of course the Armenian government is still funding Artsakh government, and Artsakh government is funding this mission. So this is just funding, a function of funding.
But doesn't the host government also have to somehow allow this to happen? So, for instance, the reason that they were allowed is because Artsakh was part of the OSCE Minsk Group negotiations, and as such, there was a diplomatic need for diplomatic contact.
Right. Still there is Artsakh as a separate entity, and actually it's now becoming increasingly more separate from Armenia. So I don't think that's going to change. I'm not privy to what is going on behind, but I'm sure there is some reassessment of of everything. I don't know what's going to happen in the end. But at this point, in the past too, you had to, like, if you were a U.S. citizen, basically visiting Artsakh, you had to get a visa, but you had an option, and most people used rather than getting a visa in Artsakh mission in Yerevan, they would get that visa after coming into Stepanakert, and the day after, maybe, usually it's like a day trip, so you come late in the evening, next morning I would go and get my visa at Artsakh Foreign Ministry. And it was very, relaxed process. It was easy to get the visa. There was no issues. They would just try to find out where you're planning to travel, whether you plan traveling to the front line, etc. And they try to regulate that aspect of it, border visits. But beyond that, it was pretty easy to get into Artsakh, and really a lot of people I know would go in and forget to get a visa and leave without getting a visa, and they'd just say, okay, you can go. So it's not, it wasn't a real regime like that. But now that the Russians are in charge of it, of course the Russians are much more strict when it comes to visas and regulations and who can come in, who can't come in. So you should be expecting that. And of course there is also the Azerbaijani pressure on the Russians to kind of not to get into this troublemakers visiting Artsakh and making statements and all that stuff. So you'll have that kind of combined pressures happening on, and I think the effect that's going to have is that very few people will be visiting Artsakh. That's what's going to happen.
In other news on Artsakh, there were plans to build 200 new housing units in the Astrakhan community of Askeran. And this is interesting. I think that, some kind of reconstruction needs to start happening and actually needs to sort of in earnest happen. But, post-war reconstruction will require a lot of significant investment. And the financial load on the government, especially considering other major expenditures, such as the reorganization of the army to a contract-based one, and the significant loss of income sources, such as farmland in Hadrut that we talked about, and hydroelectric power plants. Alen, do you have any idea, or have you read, how would the financing of this reconstruction happen? It seems to be a significant investment that's required.
Well, the announcement itself said that the money would be coming from state resources and also philanthropic resources, but it was very vague. It wasn't specific about who would be funding it. Like you said, obviously Artsakh has much less state revenue at this point after losing all that territory, and also Artsakh. Part of Artsakh's budget, if I'm not mistaken, comes from the Republic of Armenia. Now that the Armenian government is kind of washing its hands of Artsakh and handing it over to Russia, I wonder if there's if that money is going to dry up as well. My guess is the only assumption I can make is that Russia is helping with the reconstruction and development efforts. One other related thing I wanted to note is that Artsakh before the war had a population of about 140,000 people. It was estimated that about 90,000 had left. And my understanding is about 50,000 have come back. So there's right now there's about 100,000 people in Artsakh, 40,000 still displaced, living in Armenia and probably other places. But as more people start coming back, obviously they can't go. A lot of them can't go back to their homes. So these new communities will be essential for them to return.
Yeah, it's hard to look at the situation as sustainable in any way. Economic activity, it appears, other than services, basic services, and government work have basically ground to a halt there. All the natural resources that were lost, and all the production capacity that was lost, and people that were lost as well. It's the only sort of source of potential funding in this situation is that you would have thought that if the security responsibility is now passed on to the Russian government, there should be some funds freeing up from the security expenses onto, economic rebuilding or something like that. But it's really not the case, because basically right now Armenian army is supposed to defend a longer border than it defended before. The expenses related to the draft and mobilization and deployment and engineering work and resupply and all of that, I don't think they're going to decrease, unless they basically decide not to have a military anymore and just shut down the Armenian army totally. That can be done as well.
So last week we talked about the internal political developments, and we talked about snap elections. But around the time when we were recording our podcast last week, the ruling 𝐤𝐤 parliamentary faction announced cancellation of their plans for snap elections, citing lack of popular demand for elections and that the parliamentary opposition had rejected the idea of snap elections. This is their terminology. So, Emil, political machinations aside, what do you think should be the actions of a government that was at the helm as the Artsakh war catastrophe took place? And is there a historic comparison that we can draw?
I'm not in advisory capacity here. I just I can present my vision and my analysis of the situation. And my analysis is the following. The leader of the Armenian government, Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, realizes that basically his way out of government is basically a direct route to either exile or jail. So in that situation, he's very reluctant to take that route. He doesn't want to be exiled, he doesn't want to be jailed. So if that's the case, he stays, and if there's no strong pressure for him to either have early elections or to resign, he will stay. And all of these conversations will continue, but they'll have a little relevance on the immediate situation. So that's how I view it.
Alan, what do you think about the flip-flop? How sincere do you think it was, or the decision not to have snap elections and their reasoning for it? And do you think, as some have argued, that it was simply a maneuver by the government to take some steam out of the opposition's momentum, a ploy to slow them down, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't trust anything that this government says. The fact that they said they were going to have a snap election didn't really mean much. They obviously at some point tried to assess public opinion and what their chances were of winning the election. And especially after Robert Kocharyan announced that he would participate in the elections, I think they decided that it probably wasn't a great idea. But in general, like Emil said, they'll do anything right now because to stay in power, because the alternative is at least Nikol Pashinyan, but also at least top members of his team as well will probably face trial or will have to flee. Yeah, I mean, we could see this. They're taking very concrete steps towards even consolidating their power even more and becoming even more authoritarian, right? They're passing bills on restricting media. They're passing bills. They're trying to create new courts. They're just trying to give themselves more levers to suppress the opposition and hold on to power.
And big issue here is the fact that the people who came to parliament, many of them fairly well educated, and I think appreciate the fact that what the future of Armenia is not in having totally incompetent tyrant such as Nikol Pashinyan in charge, and that there should be a way out of this situation. And the way out of the situation, obviously, constitutionally, Parliament is empowered to remove the military rule and to replace the Prime Minister. But unfortunately, you see this just pitiful state of this people in Parliament, and really disappointing in terms of the product that the Armenian society was able to generate in terms of delegating into parliament, and essentially it's just a sad situation. What can I say?
Well, let's see what happens on the internal political scene.
I mean, obviously, the members of parliament should also realize that the longer they drag the situation on, because they're the ones, ultimately, they're the ones responsible for this, for electing the prime minister and keeping them in power. They also will bear the price of it. There's just no way that they won't.
Interesting thing about... Sorry, I just wanted to add something. Nikol Pashinyan, obviously, his My Step bloc has 88 members in parliament, or had it after the election 2 years ago. But I believe 4 or 5 people have left the faction, but have stayed on as independent members of parliament. One of them, distinctly, I remember when she left. I think it was like their press secretary or something of the civil contract said something like, this person would not, even if Nikol Pashinyan's backpack were running against this person, the backpack would have won. So basically, this is how they view their parliamentarians, is just their backpacks basically.
There's nothing new, what's his name? Caesar at one point had this horse elected to Senate, or at least there's this legend. There's nothing new about that. There's always big personalities that basically make or break political situations, and especially in politically informed societies such as Armenia, personalities are the ones deciding things, and that's not. If we look at the situation in the early '90s in Armenia, that I was. Just before this podcast, I was listening to Joel Austin a little bit, the preacher from Houston, the huge church in Houston, and he was talking about how you got to keep the negativity out and just keep your atmosphere clear and focus on the positive. And I was trying to think how to focus on the positive in the present situation in Armenia, and the only way to do it, I think, is to, again, go back to the early 90s, that period of 91, 92, when things looked really bleak, really, really bleak. It was a big earthquake just a few years earlier. There was no light. People were leaving in droves. Situation looked really hopeless. And, that's why Levon Petrosyan, at the time leader of Armenia, was going around the world begging for help, begging for U.S. to do something. Said send UN observers to Karabakh to protect Armenians there, and to do something, because he didn't think that things could be turned around. Things got turned around first in Karabakh and then in Armenia. The reason that happened was because you had people like Kocharian basically, exercising their will over everybody else. People were as disorganized as they are today. People fled their homes in Shaumian and Mardaker, just like they fled their homes in Hadrut and Karabajar and Kashatagh this time around. And it continued until there was somebody with the will to impose a different reality on everybody else. And obviously that happened with associated costs as well. But that's the only way to turn things around. I'm not saying Kocharian is the solution right now. I don't know if it's possible or not, but there has to be a person like that that emerges, that just starts fixing things first at maybe lesser than pan-national level, and then rises above everybody else and starts to fix things on the country level. So for now, that's not happening. But what I'm saying is it's possible that it could happen.
You mentioned something about earlier in the podcast about the government being collaborationist. Obviously, we talked about the parliamentarians as well. It seems that they, at least until now, they're feeling pretty safe in their position to back the government. And it always baffles me because Alen Simonyan himself said, post-war, you had war, you had so much catastrophe, and we only lost 4 or 5 members. He said something like that as an accomplishment and as an indication that there is still strong support from them.
I think there are only just a very small minority that is as khabargats as Alen Simonyan. Everybody else is pretty quiet. And they're scared, and they're upset, and they're unhappy. But again, lack of sort of leaders, other leaders within that group of people other than Nikol Pashinyan undermines, makes it impossible for these people to challenge Nikol. So
okay, yeah, I just want to note that we talk about some defections, but yeah, it's important to mention that they only lost 3 or 4. I mean, they lost more people who just resigned, but they put down their mandate, which means that the ruling My Step can then appoint other people in their stead. But only 4 or 5 of them actually kept their mandate and decided to stay on as an independent parliamentarian, which means that at least now My Step doesn't have the 88 required, the absolute constitutional majority, meaning that they can unilaterally determine things, but they still have a pretty huge majority in parliament. And that's just an interesting dynamic to observe.
Yeah, but it seems like there might be issues with constitutional majority, at least on the issue of changing the constitution to make self-dissolution of the parliament possible. I'm not sure if that's the case, but there might be. At least on that issue, I think there's sort of greater resistance that the caucus for keeping the parliamentary seats is pretty strong there, that people don't want to part with their salaries and whatnot.
Well, this is our podcast today. Thank you everyone for your time, and talk to you next week.
Okay, now let's talk about all of the sexy stuff we missed.
And that concludes our program for this episode of 𝐄𝐦𝐢𝐥 Week in Review. We hope it has helped your understanding of some of the issues from this previous week. We look forward to your feedback and suggestions for issues to cover in greater depth. Contact us on our website at 𝐄𝐦𝐢𝐥.org, that's GROONG, and on our Facebook page, ANN-𝐄𝐦𝐢𝐥, or in our Facebook group, 𝐄𝐦-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Laura Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. I'm 𝐄𝐦𝐢𝐥 𝐒𝐚𝐬𝐢𝐴n, and on behalf of everyone in this episode, I wish you a good week. Thank you for listening, and talk to you next week.